So much, Heather. There are many throughout the world, and by many, I mean well more than 1 billion in particular because of official Hinduism, but many throughout the world that believe in the notion of reincarnation. And if you're aware, likely what that means, it is that you have your life, and depending on how well it is that you lived in this life, you're going to come back in some other life form afterwards, and that's going to be determined based on how you did in this one. And needless to say, I don't believe that. I think that's completely at odds with Scripture. I'm grateful that it is not simply that I don't believe that. I am certain that that is a doctrine that is completely erroneous. And I'll be honest with you, I am really, 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 really glad there is no such thing as reincarnation. Do you know why? Because I feel pretty certain if there was reincarnation, I would come back either as our dishwasher, our washing machine, or our dryer. And among those devices in our house, you don't want to be any of those things. Our dishwasher runs at least daily, and it's not completely unusual for it to run twice in the scope of a day. And so the dishwasher is busy. Our washing machine, though, while tired, is a wonderful, wonderful machine. And I'm telling you, it's the biggest washing machine I've seen that wasn't at a laundromat. I really believe our youngest 3 children, we could wash inside of it, but we only do that sometimes, like for special occasions. Anyway, but it's a huge washing machine, and in truth, though, whether your washing machine is huge or it's not huge, you know what we tend to do? We tend to put it to the max, right? So whether it holds a little or a lot, we'll not just take it to the max. Sometimes we'll take it into the red. Which leads me to the thing that I would probably least want to be, which is our dryer, because our washing machine is getting these massive loads of clothes, but the dryer is not comparably sized, I don't think. It just doesn't hold quite as many. That doesn't mean that we don't shove them in there, and so we turn it in there or put the clothes in there, turn it on high heat and the longest time, and then you wait for it to buzz to go get the clothes out. And invariably, especially if there are going to be any jeans or towels or stuff like that, you stick your hand in there and like, oh, these things are still wet. I need to let it run even more. And sometimes you'll go check it a second time, and they're still not done. And regularly you find yourself thinking this is taking longer than I thought. This is taking longer than I thought. Now, while that is the case, it is also the case that I'm kind of okay with that now. And I am that way because I know probably we've put too many clothes in it. But secondly, this is just kind of how it works. This is the drill. Get used to it. It's going to take longer than whatever you thought, so just get used to it. We have been, and we're continuing to think today about this whole experience as followers of Christ, where we find ourselves at crossroads. We are needing God to answer us in a particular way. We're needing God to provide an opportunity, to open the door, to close the door, to show us what to do, to work in a particular situation. But regularly, so many times in our lives, if you have a walk with God and you take that seriously and you want Him involved in your life, you're going to find yourself waiting on Him. And sometimes what you're going to experience as you wait is that you're going to wait longer than you expected. Do we like that? No. So what do? Do we just tell ourselves like I do with a dryer, well, it stinks, that's just how it is. Get used to it. Well, that's a pretty lousy response, isn't it? I mean, just get used to it? That's not a good answer. I don't like that answer. So is there a way that God would help us today to answer that question? What do I do when I'm waiting longer than I expected? I think He does give us an answer that's a lot better than just get used to it. And we see that answer today in Genesis chapter 41. If you would look with me in your Bibles there today. Actually, we're going to look at 2 verses in Genesis 40 and then one in verse 1 of Genesis 41. Genesis 40, we're going to start with verse 14. If you have trouble finding Genesis, if you would give your Bible to someone. Genesis 40, verse 14. We're going to pick up the rest of the story in just a moment, but it says, and this is Joseph talking. He says, when all goes well for you, remember that I was with you. Please show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. Now skip down to verse 1 of chapter 41. At the end of 2 years, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing beside of the Nile. What I want you to see is the beginning of that verse. At the end of 2 years. Joseph is a guy that had a relationship with God, and he waited. In fact, I am certain that he waited far, far longer than he ever wanted, and certainly far longer than he ever expected. And I believe from his experience, God shows us the answer today. What is it that I should do? What is it that you should do when you're having to wait on him longer than you thought? I think the first thing that we need to do based on what we see in this story is this. Send reminders to the right person. Send reminders to the right person. As I said, this is obviously a story that we're picking up actually kind of late in the story. But let me just, so that we're all on the same page, take you back a number of chapters in the book of Genesis. We're introduced to a guy whose name is Jacob, who has 12 sons. And even though he has 12 sons, he doesn't treat them all the same. Number 11 is his absolute favorite, and that's Joseph. And the favoritism that he demonstrates towards him is not subtle or hidden. He gives to Joseph stuff that he doesn't and will not give to the other kids. Specifically, he gives him, among other things, this coat of many colors that would have been a prized possession at this point in history. It would have been very expensive. This would have been like going to Neiman Marcus and finding the most expensive outerwear that you could possibly find and giving it to just one of 12 kids. And Joseph, not to his credit, I think he enjoyed parading himself around with this coat, like, look at what Daddy gave me. And you can imagine how this made the brothers feel, and that's exactly how they did feel. Over and over and over, they kept seeing these signs of favoritism so that they increasingly began to resent their brother, their own flesh and blood. Not just resent him, but get to the point where they hated him. Long story short, perhaps you remember more details than I'm going to go into, but they decided, we want to kill him. We want to kill him. And before they do that, one of the other brothers says, hey, wait a minute, let's take a time out. If we kill him, we get nothing for it. But if we sell him off as a slave, at least we get rid of him, and we've got some money in our pockets. Long story short, that's what they do. They sell Joseph off, their own brother, as a slave to slave traders headed towards Egypt. He's completely out of the country. We'll never see, never hear from him again. And we'll go tell Daddy Joseph's dead. So that's what they do. The father thinks that Joseph is dead, but he's anything other than dead. And he is now sold off as a slave in Egypt. And the first stop for Joseph is working for a guy who has position within the Egyptian army. He is the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. And likely this is perhaps something that we might consider close to the Secret Service. And so this is a guy that's got real proximity to the Pharaoh. And he's working for this guy named Potiphar as a slave, a servant in his house. And very quickly, Joseph demonstrates himself, hey, I'm somebody that's worthy of trust. I'm someone that is affable, and even though I don't have my freedom, you can still like me. And Potiphar really liked Joseph, so much so that he promotes him to effectively be the chief of staff there within his own home. Well, it wasn't simply that Potiphar liked Joseph. Potiphar's wife really liked Joseph. In fact, she had aspirations for him more than employment. And so she made those aspirations abundantly clear when she tried to seduce the servant, when she tried to seduce Joseph. Thankfully, Joseph, being a man that walked and followed God, was a man of integrity and commitment, and he wasn't going to engage in this adulterous affair and betray the trust of Potiphar. And so he rebuffs her advances, and she is not happy. In fact, what she does is then to say, hey, he tried to rape me. Well, Joseph didn't lay hands on her at all. He's trying to get away from her. This is a complete, utter fabrication, but it's Potiphar's wife saying this about Joseph. So what's Potiphar going to do? He's got to trust what his wife says, even though he's got such great affinity for Joseph, and so he has him sent to prison. Why? Because he's a person of power and influence. He can make that happen, and so that's where we find Joseph at this point. So here he is. He's lost his freedom, first of all, being sold as a slave. Things got a little bit better when he's got a position of comfort, a position of authority within Potiphar's house, but now he's lost that, and he's not just simply in jail. We're told here that he's in the dungeon of the jail. Well, while he is there, he's not the only inmate, and there's turnaround. There's people that are coming into prison as well, and a couple of the guys that show up in prison are some folks that really have some close proximity to the Pharaoh, and one of them is the king's chief cupbearer, and the other is the king's chief baker. Excuse me, is the Pharaoh's chief baker. And so both of these two, we don't know exactly what they've done, but they have run afoul of the Pharaoh, and so he has them sent to prison. And while they are there, they each have these dreams. And they have these dreams, and they're not sure exactly of what it is they mean. And they have these dreams to the point where it troubled them. There's got to be something of significance. Long story short, they share those dreams with Joseph, and he interprets those dreams for them. And so what he does is that he shares with them the interpretation. And you see, starting back in verse 13 of chapter 40, it says, in just 3 days, he's talking to the cupbearer here. 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head. He will restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand the way you used to when you were his cupbearer. So you're going to get your job back, and things are going to go really well for you. Chief baker, not so much. He's going to hang you. So good news for one, really bad news for the other. But he says to the cupbearer, Joseph does, and that's what we read in verse 14. When all goes well for you, remember that I was with you. Show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. And then he underscores the injustices that he has endured, that he's been kidnapped from his home, and he's done nothing wrong, and he's done nothing wrong to wind up in prison, done nothing wrong to wind up as a slave. Put in a word, please, for me when you get back to Pharaoh. What's this? This is, you scratch my back, or I scratch your back, you scratch mine. We do this type of thing all the time. I've helped you, you help me. When you get back to your position, when you get back to the place of opportunity, how about saying something to Pharaoh, because I don't know that I'm ever going to get out of here. As Joseph does this, as the cupbearer is released, and that's exactly what happens. As the cupbearer is released, and he goes back to the Pharaoh, what do you think that Joseph is thinking? Any day now. It probably won't happen today, or maybe tomorrow. It might take a couple of days. You know, he's got to go back, the cupbearer, he's got to go back to human resources. He's got to, sign up for benefits and all that stuff again. And there's all these details that he needs to attend to. And so he'll get a chance to say something. And so, hopefully within, 3 to 5 business days, maybe 7 to 10, perhaps. But I'm going to be out of this jail very soon. Well, 1 week turns into 2 weeks, turns into a month, turns into a quarter, turns into 6 months, turns into a year. This is taking a while. In fact, this is taking a long while. This is taking exponentially longer than I had thought. What's the matter with that silly cupbearer? I mean, I helped him. He didn't do anything. And what do you think that Joseph is feeling about God? Do you even have one of these? Have you ever heard of a thing called a calendar? The clock keeps ticking. I keep losing days. I keep experiencing and enduring this injustice. Aren't you going to do something? You got to know that as a man of faith and commitment to God, that Joseph, even though we're not told this in any elaborate detail, but Joseph had to be a man of prayer, and he's been talking to God, saying, God, please get me out of here. Please rescue me. This opportunity presented itself with the cupbearer, and so please let the Pharaoh send someone to get me out of here soon. Any day he thinks that he's going to be sprung from prison. And I realize this is an argument from silence, but it's going to be an argument that is going to have, I think, a little bit more merit here in just a moment. But it's important to note what Joseph doesn't do. You don't see, first of all, any attempts that Joseph makes. You don't see any attempts to seek to remind the cupbearer. Psst, remember me? Remember that whole dream interpretation thing? Remember me stuck? You don't see any of that. He's not sending thinking of you notes in the mail. You don't see that. But also, you don't have any record of this. You don't have Joseph reminding God where he is. What I believe was going on, and I believe there's evidence of this that we'll see in just a moment, is that there is some reminding that is going on. There is reminding that is going on, but this is the reminding, I think, that's actually transpiring. Joseph is reminding himself, God knows where I am. God knows where I am. God doesn't need to remember that, but I need to. Back earlier in this year, I think it was back in May, there is an annual free bluegrass festival that meets at Hagenstone Park on the other side of town. And like from here, Hagenstone Park is about, 30 minutes or so away. And there's this free bluegrass thing called Pickin' in the Park. And it's not huge, but there may be 500 or 600 people that go to it. And long story short, our older 3 boys were helping out as volunteers. And so they had already gone over there to help with some setup or working some stuff at the park. Caroline had some sort of ladies event here at the church, and so I had the other littles with me, and then I went over there at some other time, and then Caroline joins all of us. So by the time we get there to Hagenstone Park, there are 3 different vehicles. I'm driving one, Nathan's driving one, Caroline's driving one. We've been there for a while. It's time to leave, and we start dividing up. The older boys have not had anything to eat, and so they want to go with Nathan, and they're going to stop and get something to eat on the way home. The others that are there, nobody's wanting. I don't know why. Nobody's saying about riding with Daddy. And so Caroline leaves with people headed to her car. Nathan's got people headed with him, and so I'm going to hang out for a little bit, and then I'm going to go home. And that's what I did. I went home by myself. Again, it's about 30 minutes. We live close to the church, about 30 minutes back over to this side of town. When I get home, Caroline is already there, and I walk in the back door. I go into the den, and Caroline says, "Where's Peter?" He's our 6-year-old. And I said, he's with you. I don't know. She said, he's not with me. I thought he was with you. So now we've got a 6-year-old running the Bluegrass Festival out at Hagenstone Park. About that time, we get a call. We got a neighbor behind us whose name is Lisa. Lisa's sister-in-law has been around us as well, and she recognized our kids and recognized us. Her sister-in-law calls Lisa and says, "Hey, I've got your neighbor's little boy with me." Just go ahead and say, our parenting book is coming out in January. If you would like, we'll autograph some copies of it. It's not very long. It's called Indicted. Anyway, long story short, she found Peter kind of walking around scared and crying. Don't do that. And so she gets Peter with her, and then she calls Lisa, who lets us know. And long story short, we're able to get Peter back. And by the time we get Peter back, he's up there, he's sitting on the stage, and Peter's okay. He's cool. Why? Because at this point, he knows that the people who can help me know where I am. He's okay because he knows that the people who can help me know where I am. Let me just remind you that the one who made you knows what you're going through. And you have borne your heart to him, and you've said, "God, I need you to open this door. I need you to provide this opportunity. I need you to speak into the circumstance. I need you to show me what to do. I need you to work in this, whatever." I mean, it's a million different things it could be. And so many times we can then sit there, okay, the clock is ticking. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not seeing anything. There's no one's calling, offering me a job. There's not a check that showed up in the mail. There's not some decision that's very clear that showed up in an email. God, do you not know what's going on? God doesn't need you reminding him about your circumstance. But this is the case. You need to remind you that God knows about your circumstance. Because I'm telling you this, when you understand that the one who can help you knows what you're going through, it makes it easier to wait. We're going to my clock, my timing, my calendar is not at all like God's. And I want Him to do the things that I want, and I want Him to do those things yesterday. You are likely the exact same way. And as we experience these delays, as we're waiting longer than we expected, we could just say, well, you gotta buck up. You just got to figure it out. Don't do that. You need to send some reminders. But the reminders that you need to send need to go this way. He knows where I am. He knows what I'm going through. He knows what the need is. And you need to keep reminding yourself, because the wait, it could be a while. For Joseph at this point, it's at least 2 years. He's been waiting, and it is important that he reminds himself that God knows what's going on, because that helps him, I believe, do the next thing that you and I need to do, and that's this: guard against frustration producing independence. Guard against frustration producing independence. What's going on? As you get to chapter 41, we're told 2 years. We don't know how long Joseph in full was in prison. I mean, he was in prison before the cupbearer and the baker show up. He was in jail then. And so he's been in jail for more than 2 years. He's not done a thing wrong. He didn't deserve to be kidnapped. He didn't deserve to be thrown in prison. None of this did he deserve. He's wanting out of this. He's waiting. And 2 years after the cupbearer has been released, the Pharaoh also has a dream. And as you read chapter 41, we're told the contents of the dream. And this troubled the Pharaoh. He's concerned about it. This must mean something. And so he gets together the wise men of Egypt. He says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I need you to tell me, here's what I had as a dream. Tell me what that means. It's got to mean something. I've had this dream repeatedly. What does that mean? And they said, Your Majesty, I don't know. I have no idea. One person looks at another, looks at another, looks at another. No one has any idea what this means. And then in verse 9, you see this. The cupbearer says to Pharaoh, today I remember my faults. We would say it like this. And maybe you've done this before. Stupid me, silly me. I can't believe I forgot this. And that's what he's saying. I can't believe I've forgotten this. He says, when you were angry with your servants, you put me and the baker in the custody of the captain of the guards. He and I had dreams on the same night. Each dream had its own meaning. And there was a Hebrew. I don't remember what his name was. A young Hebrew. He was with us there. We told him our dreams. He interpreted our dreams for us. Each had its own interpretation. And I'm telling you, Pharaoh, exactly what he said was going to happen, happened. He said that the other guy was going to get hanged, and he's been gone now. His funeral was 2 years ago. He said that I would be restored to my position, and I've been here now for 2 years. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he can help you. So verse 14 says they sent for Joseph, and they quickly brought him from where? From the dungeon. The dungeon is part of this prison, and I don't know if you thought about this, it is not the nicest part of it. So it's not simply that he's in the jail, but he's in the worst part of the jail. We're told that he shaved, he changed his clothes, and goes to Pharaoh. Why do you think he does all of this? Well, it is likely that if you are in the worst part of the prison, you're not going to be cared for particularly well. He needs to shave because after at least 2 years, it looks like he could probably join ZZ Top. And so he's got this lengthy beard. He's probably nasty. His clothes, they're probably not giving him fresh uniforms in prison, and they're probably threadbare and just nasty. He probably is a ghastly sight. You can't have an audience with the Pharaoh looking like that, so you need to get yourself together. They put him some fresh clothes on. They give him a shower, wash his hair. They get his beard shaved, and now it's time for him to go and see the Pharaoh. Verse 15, Pharaoh says to Joseph once he gets there, I've had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it. Somebody said, you might be able to do something about this. Imagine if you're Joseph hearing this. Cha-ching. I've been waiting for this. This is my chance. This is my chance to shine. I can demonstrate my value to him. I could say, man, You betcha I can do this. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this will be my chance to be sprung from prison. But notice how he begins his statement. He says, I am not able to. Isn't that strange? This presents him with a significant and unique opportunity to demonstrate to the Pharaoh just how unique he is, just how valuable he is, and in doing so, just how unwarranted it is to have a resource like that sitting in jail. Does he take this as an opportunity to say, look at me, I can do this? He says, I can't do this, but then he says this, it is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. He says, I can't do it, but God can. Why do you think it is that I believe that Joseph kept reminding himself, God knows where I am. God knows where I am. God knows what's going on. God's got this. I don't know how, I don't know when, but he knows where I am. Why do you think it is I believe that he kept reminding himself of this? Notice his attitude towards God. What many reasonably, logically might have come up with or landed on was absolute frustration and bitterness with God. I'm tired of this whole faith thing. It hasn't worked out. I believed in God for years, and I wound up as a slave in Egypt. I believed in God when I was sitting in Pharaoh's house, and then I wound up in prison. I've been doing stuff right. I'm not perfect, but I've been taking this seriously. I've been calling out to God, and I get nothing but crickets. It's day after day, month after month, year after year. I'm tired of waiting. I'm so sick of waiting on God. I have no interest in doing this anymore. What could have happened is that his wait led to frustration, so that he does what? He steps back and says, I got this. I got this. But what does he do? He says, I can't do this, but God can. Why do you think he's saying that? Because he kept reminding himself day in and day out, God knows where I am. Why is it important for him to remember this? Why is it important for Joseph to remember, I am not alone in this? Well, I may be in the dungeon, and this may be miserable, but Joseph knew this, I'm not alone. Why does that matter? Because if you get to the point where you think you're the only one in this circumstance, what does that mean? It means also you're the only one who can get you out of the circumstance. If no one else knows, then no one else can help. Some years ago, we had a wedding here at the church on a Saturday night. And typically what I do is I come back over on Saturday nights and I review the message so that I'm not standing up here reading to you, and I get it fresh in my mind. I'm ready to roll on Sundays. And so we'd had a wedding that afternoon, and afterwards there was the reception I'd been to. And then part of my normal routine, I came back over here. Now, the reception was still going on, and the sanctuary was still set up for a wedding. Now, at that point, we used to have the communion table in here, and these steps were in here, and so they needed to come out and to get the table back in. And so I thought, I'm going to just help the family out so that, they've got enough on their plate. I'm going to see if I can put some of this stuff away so that when they get back here later tonight, they have less to do. And so it was this section of stairs that I'm wanting to take out. You likely have never touched these, most of these. Let me just go ahead and tell you, they're heavy. They're heavy. In fact, one person just can't, you can't move these just by yourself. And so I went and got a hand truck. And so I get a hand truck, and I maneuver these things out. I get them on the hand truck, and I get over to that door, and somehow the weight shifts, and these things fall on me. Thankfully, we didn't have cameras back then. But I'm laying over here looking like a ladybug with stairs on me. And you know what I didn't do? I didn't call out for anybody. I didn't say, somebody help me. Somebody get these stairs off me. I didn't say I've fallen and I can't get up. Do you know why? Because I knew there was nobody else here. And if I'm in this just by myself, then it's on me to get out. In case you're wondering, I got out. Let me restate that again. I didn't ask for help. I depended on me because I knew only I knew that I was in trouble. Only I knew that I had a problem.
When you find yourself waiting, as the days turn into weeks, and as the weeks can turn into months, and it's stretching out far, far longer than you ever thought, wanted, expected, or hoped, you don't like that. It's human nature. It's my nature. I want an answer, and I want it yesterday. I want you to do something. I want you to do it right now. When I keep waiting, I increasingly get frustrated. But I need to remind myself, He knows where I am. I need to keep telling myself that so that I don't wind up frustrated to the point where I'm like, it's just, I got to watch out for A1A. I got to watch out for me because clearly no one else is. Joseph waited. He waited a lot longer than he ever thought it would take. A lot longer than he ever wanted it to take. But he serves for us as a great example of what we should do. We need to send reminders to the right person. We need to guard against our frustration, producing independence so that I'm thinking about myself and solving my issues independently from God. And ultimately, this takes us back to what the psalmist said very clearly this way. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. And notice how he finished that statement. The maker of heaven and earth. If he could do all of that, if he could do all of this, I can keep waiting. Are you waiting? Are you getting ready to wait? As you wait, what are you going to do? My hope is you send reminders to the right place, to the right person, and remind yourself that in such a way that you don't get frustrated where you start thinking independently of the one who made you. Will you bow your heads with me?